Dr. Elena Martinez rubbed her tired eyes as she stared at the computer screen in front of her. The clock on the wall showed 3 in the morning, and she had been working for nearly 18 hours straight at the Arecibo Deep Space Monitoring Facility. Most nights were quiet here, with nothing but the usual cosmic background noise filling the receivers, but tonight was different. The signal had started broadcasting 17 hours ago, and it was unlike anything she had ever seen before. While most space signals were random bursts of energy or natural phenomena from distant stars, this transmission showed clear signs of intelligent design. The pattern was complex, mathematical, and definitely artificial. Elena called over to her colleague Jake Coleman, who was sitting at the next workstation reviewing satellite data. "Jake, come look at this right now," she said, her voice carrying a mix of excitement and confusion. Jake walked over and looked at Elena's screen. The display showed waves of data flowing in organized patterns, with embedded frequencies that seemed to follow specific protocols. "Where is this coming from?" he asked, adjusting his glasses to get a better look at the readings. Elena pointed to the coordinate display. "About 47 light-years away, somewhere in the direction of the TRAPPIST system." "But Jake, this isn't just a simple message. Look at the structure." As Jake studied the signal more carefully, he began to understand Elena's excitement. The transmission contained multiple layers of information, all organized in ways that suggested a highly advanced communication system. There were routing codes, timestamp markers, and what appeared to be addressing information, as if the message was part of a larger network. Elena had been running the signal through their computer translation programs for hours, trying to decode its meaning. The mathematical foundation was familiar enough: prime numbers, geometric constants, and universal physical laws that any intelligent species would recognize. But the actual content of the message was far more complex and troubling. "It's not meant for us," Elena said quietly, her initial excitement fading into worry. "This signal is part of an active communication network between different civilizations, and we're accidentally intercepting it because of where Earth is positioned right now in our galactic orbit." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. "What kind of communications are we talking about here?" Elena pulled up her analysis on the screen. Over the past several hours, she had managed to decode portions of the message, and what she found was deeply concerning. The signal contained warnings about something the aliens called the silence, along with coordinates, tactical information, and what looked like evacuation protocols. According to the intercepted communications, entire star systems had been going dark across the galaxy. Civilizations that had existed for thousands of years were simply vanishing, without any trace or warning. The network was being used by surviving civilizations to coordinate their response to this unknown threat, sharing intelligence about attack patterns and safe evacuation routes. Elena showed Jake the decoded sections of the message. "Look at these timestamps and coordinates. Whatever this threat is, it's been systematically destroying civilizations across our part of the galaxy for years. These aliens are trying to organize some kind of defense or evacuation plan." Jake studied the data with growing alarm. "But if we can intercept these messages, doesn't that mean that we're in the path of whatever is causing all this destruction?" Elena finished his sentence. "Yes, that's exactly what it means." They spent the next few hours analyzing more of the signal, and the picture that emerged was terrifying. The alien network consisted of multiple highly advanced civilizations, all technologically superior to humanity by thousands of years. Despite their advanced technology and coordinated efforts, they were clearly losing ground against whatever threat they faced. The communications showed evacuation schedules, resource allocation plans, and defensive strategies that spanned multiple star systems. But underlying all of this organized activity was a sense of desperation. These civilizations were not fighting to win anymore. They were simply trying to survive. Elena realized that humanity had stumbled into the middle of an interstellar war that had been raging across the galaxy for decades. Earth's position had accidentally placed them directly in the communication path of a network they were never supposed to know about. "We need to report this immediately," Jake said, reaching for the secure communication device that connected them to government officials. Elena nodded, but her mind was racing with implications. Humanity had no defenses against threats that could destroy civilizations far more advanced than their own. Earth's most powerful weapons would be useless against enemies that had defeated species with technology beyond human understanding. But as she continued monitoring the signal, Elena began to notice something interesting about the alien communications. Despite their technological superiority, all of these civilizations seemed to think and respond in very similar ways. Their tactical approaches, evacuation procedures, and defensive strategies all followed logical, predictable patterns, Jake, she said slowly. What if being primitive actually gives us an advantage here? What do you mean? He asked, looking up from his own analysis of the signal data. Elena pointed to the strategic communications she had decoded. Look at how organized and logical all of their responses are. Every civilization in this network is approaching the problem the same way. They evacuate in orderly fashion. They establish defensive perimeters according to standard military doctrine. They coordinate their resources using efficient allocation algorithms. Jake studied the patterns Elena was highlighting. You think that's a weakness? I think it's predictable, Elena replied. If I were an enemy trying to destroy these civilizations, I could probably anticipate their moves because they all respond to threats in fundamentally similar ways. But we're completely outside their strategic framework. We're not part of their network. We don't follow their protocols, and we don't think like they do. As Elena continued monitoring the alien communications over the following days, her theory began to solidify. The threat known as the silence seemed to be always one step ahead of the coordinated alien response. It was as if their enemy could anticipate every defensive measure, every evacuation protocol, and every tactical decision the network made. Elena realized that humanity's greatest strength in this situation might not be their technology or firepower, but their complete unpredictability. They were strategic unknowns in a conflict that had become horrifically routine for both sides. The question was whether they should reveal their existence to try to help, or remain hidden and hope the silence would somehow miss Earth entirely. Either choice carried enormous risks, but doing nothing seemed like the most dangerous option of all. Elena looked at the endless stream of alien communications flowing across her screen and made a decision that would change the course of human history. They had intercepted a message that was never meant for them, but perhaps that accident was exactly what the galaxy needed. 3 weeks had passed since Elena first discovered the alien signal, and now she found herself sitting in a windowless conference room deep beneath the Pentagon. The room was filled with people she had only seen on television before: military generals, government officials, intelligence analysts, and scientists from every major research facility in the country. General Patricia Hayes sat at the head of the long table, her uniform decorated with ribbons that spoke of decades of military service. She had been appointed to lead the newly formed Extraterrestrial Response Division, a government agency that had been created within days of Elena's initial report about the intercepted communications. Dr. Martinez, the general said, looking directly at Elena, please explain to everyone here what you have discovered about these alien transmissions. Elena stood up and activated the large display screen on the wall. The room filled with the complex waveform patterns and decoded mathematical sequences that had become her entire world over the past 3 weeks. The signal originates from approximately 47 light-years away and represents communications between at least 12 distinct alien civilizations, she began. Dr. Ryan Burke, who had been brought in as the government's chief expert on alien languages, added his own analysis to Elena's presentation. We have confirmed that these civilizations are coordinating their response to a threat they call the silence. Based on the timestamp data and coordinate information we have decoded, this hostile force has been systematically destroying inhabited star systems across our sector of the galaxy. The room grew quiet as Ryan continued his explanation. The alien network has been tracking the path of destruction for several years now. Every civilization that encounters the silence simply disappears, leaving behind empty star systems with no electromagnetic signatures whatsoever. Elena felt the weight of everyone's attention as she presented the most disturbing part of their discovery. According to the projected path we have calculated from the alien communications, Earth lies directly in the root of this approaching threat. Based on the speed of advancement we have observed, the silence could reach our solar system within the next 5 to 10 years. General Hayes leaned forward in her chair. What do we know about the capabilities of these alien civilizations that are being destroyed? Ryan pulled up a new set of data on the screen. Every civilization in the network is technologically superior to humanity by thousands of years. They have interstellar travel, energy weapons that can destroy planets, and defensive systems that we cannot even begin to understand. Despite all of this advanced technology and their coordinated efforts, they are clearly losing ground against whatever the silence represents. The implications of this information hit everyone in the room simultaneously. If civilizations with technology far beyond human understanding were being systematically destroyed by this unknown threat, what possible chance could Earth have against such an enemy? Colonel Lisa Grant, who had been brought in to assess military options, spoke up from across the table. What are our defensive capabilities against this kind of threat? Essentially none, Ryan replied honestly. Our most advanced weapons would be completely useless against forces that have defeated civilizations. Millennia ahead of us technologically, Elena watched as the mood in the room shifted from curiosity to fear and then to something approaching despair. Every person present understood that they were discussing the potential extinction of the human species, and there seemed to be nothing they could do to prevent it. But Elena had been thinking about this problem for weeks now, and she had developed a theory that might offer some hope. There is one thing that might work in our favor, she said, drawing everyone's attention back to her presentation. The alien communications we have intercepted reveal something interesting about how all of these advanced civilizations approach problems. Despite their technological differences, they all think and respond in fundamentally similar ways. Their evacuation procedures follow logical patterns, their defensive strategies are based on sound military principles, and their resource allocation follows efficient mathematical algorithms. Dr. Ben Torres, a former NASA communications engineer who had been studying the alien network protocols, understood what Elena was suggesting. You think their predictability is a weakness? I think it makes them vulnerable to an enemy that has learned to anticipate their responses, Elena replied. Look at the tactical data we have decoded. The silence always seems to be one step ahead of the coordinated alien response. It's as if their enemy can predict every defensive measure, every evacuation protocol, and every strategic decision the network makes. Elena moved to a new section of her presentation that showed pattern analysis of the alien communications. Every civilization in this network has evolved along similar technological and social paths. They have developed comparable weapon systems, similar organizational structures, and equivalent strategic thinking processes. For thousands of years, they have been fighting their battles using variations of the same fundamental approaches. General Hayes began to understand the direction of Elena's argument. And you believe the silence has adapted to these predictable patterns? Exactly, Elena confirmed. But we represent something completely different. We are strategic unknowns in a conflict that has become routine. No one in the galaxy knows we exist, which means no one would expect us to intervene in this war. The room buzzed with quiet conversations as officials began to discuss the implications of Elena's theory. The idea that humanity's primitive technology and unpredictable thinking might actually be advantages in this situation was both encouraging and terrifying. Dr. Amy Watson, a military strategist who had been analyzing the Concordance's tactical data, stood up to address the room. I have been studying the battle reports and strategic communications that Dr. Martinez has decoded, and I believe her analysis is correct. These alien civilizations are like chess masters who have been playing against other chess masters for thousands of years. They know all the standard moves, all the proven strategies, and all the logical responses to every situation. Amy moved to the display screen and highlighted specific examples from the alien communications. But what happens when you need someone who has never learned the rules of chess? Someone who might make moves that seem completely irrational to experienced players. Elena felt a growing sense of excitement as she realized that others were beginning to understand her perspective. That's exactly what I'm suggesting. Our greatest strength in this situation isn't our technology or our firepower. It's our complete unpredictability. General Hayes looked around the room at the assembled officials and experts. Are you proposing that we attempt to make contact with this alien network? Elena nodded. I believe we should reveal our existence and offer whatever assistance our civilization can provide. We may not have advanced technology, but we have something the silence has never encountered before. Strategic, thinking that operates completely outside established galactic norms. The debate that followed. Elena's presentation would continue for days. involving consultations with world leaders and detailed analysis of every possible outcome. But the foundation had been laid for one of the most important decisions in human history: whether to reveal themselves to the galaxy and offer help that no one expected them to be able to provide. 6 months of careful work had gone into crafting humanity's first message to the stars. Elena stood in the newly constructed Deep Space Communication Center, watching as Dr. Ben Torres made final adjustments to the massive transmission array that would broadcast their response to the alien network. The facility had been built in complete secrecy in the Nevada desert, far from any populated areas where the transmission might be detected by civilian observers. Elena had worked closely with Ben and a team of linguists, mathematicians, and communication specialists to develop a message that would demonstrate humanity's intelligence while acknowledging their technological limitations. The message began with mathematical proofs that any advanced civilization would recognize, followed by information about Earth's location, humanity's biological characteristics, and most importantly, their desire to help in whatever way possible. "Broadcasting now," Ben announced as he activated the transmission sequence. The message would travel at the speed of light toward the coordinates they had identified as the central hub of the alien communication network. Even at that incredible speed, it would take months for their signal to reach its destination and additional months for any response to return to Earth. Elena felt a mixture of excitement and terror as she watched the transmission. Indicators confirmed that their message was successfully broadcasting into space. Humanity had just announced its existence to civilizations that had been fighting a war for survival across the galaxy. There was no way to predict how the aliens would react to discovering that a primitive species had been listening to their private communications. The response came much faster than anyone had expected. Just 3 days after Earth's transmission ended, Elena's monitoring equipment detected incoming signals from multiple sources simultaneously. The alien network was responding to humanity's message with what appeared to be shock, disbelief, and something that Elena interpreted as desperate hope. Ryan Burke worked around the clock to decode the incoming communications, and what he discovered exceeded everyone's wildest expectations. The aliens called themselves the Concordants, a defensive alliance that had been formed in response to the silence. Through careful translation work, humanity began to learn the full scope of the threat they faced. The silence was not just destroying civilizations randomly. It was systematically erasing all traces of their existence, leaving behind empty star systems that showed no signs that intelligent life had ever existed there. Planets were stripped of their atmospheres. Stars were somehow dimmed or extinguished entirely, and even the electromagnetic signatures of past civilizations were completely eliminated from space. Commander Lisa Grant had been appointed to coordinate the military aspects of humanity's involvement with the Concordants. As she studied the translated communications from the Alien Alliance, she began to understand why Elena's theory about predictability might be correct. The Concordance members were indeed ancient, sophisticated, and remarkably similar in their approach to strategic thinking. "Look at these battle reports," Lisa said during one of their daily briefing sessions. "Every civilization in the Concordance has responded to the silence using variations of the same basic strategies. They evacuate threatened populations using standardized protocols. They establish defensive perimeters according to accepted military doctrine, and they coordinate their resources using mathematical optimization algorithms." Elena studied the tactical data that Lisa had compiled from weeks of decoded alien communications. The pattern was clear and disturbing. For thousands of years, the various members of the Concordance had developed their military capabilities along parallel paths, creating weapon systems and defensive strategies that were technologically different but strategically identical. Dr. Amy Watson, who had been analyzing the strategic aspects of the ongoing war, made an observation that sent chills through everyone in the room. "The silence has been fighting the same war for decades. It has encountered every possible variation of conventional galactic warfare doctrine. Every time the Concordance develops a new defensive strategy, the silence adapts to counter it within a matter of months." Ben pulled up a timeline on the main display screen that showed the progression of the conflict over the past 50 years. The pattern was unmistakable. Each time the Concordance implemented new evacuation procedures, the silence found ways to prevent populations from escaping. Each time they developed new weapons systems, the silence deployed countermeasures that neutralized their effectiveness. Each time they established new defensive positions, the Silence found ways to bypass or destroy them. It's like they're fighting against an enemy that can predict their every move, Elena observed. Amy nodded grimly. That's exactly what's happening. The Silence has learned to anticipate every response that an advanced logical civilization would make to any given threat. But all of its learning data comes from civilizations that think and respond in fundamentally similar ways. Elena realized that this was the key to understanding humanity's potential role in the conflict. The concordant civilizations had evolved along predictable paths, developing technology and military doctrine according to logical principles that any advanced species would discover. But humans had evolved in complete isolation from galactic norms, developing their own unique approaches to problem-solving that operated outside established patterns. Lisa began to formulate the first outline of what would later become known as human tactical doctrine. Instead of following established evacuation protocols, what if we suggested completely irrational alternatives? Instead of fortifying obvious defensive positions, what if we recommended abandoning them entirely? Instead of engaging the Silence with military precision, what if we proposed tactical chaos? The idea was both brilliant and terrifying. Elena understood that they were proposing to advise civilizations, thousands of years more advanced than humanity, to abandon proven military strategies in favor of approaches that violated every principle of logical tactical thinking. But as she continued studying the communications from the concordance, Elena became convinced that conventional logic was exactly what was getting them defeated. The Silence had learned to counter logical responses, but it had never encountered a species that deliberately chose illogical ones. The first opportunity to test human strategic thinking came when the concordance shared intelligence about the Silence's next target. The Kepler 442 system contained 2 inhabited planets with a combined population of over 3 billion beings. According to standard concordance protocols, they would evacuate the civilian population while establishing a defensive perimeter using automated weapons platforms. Elena's team proposed something completely different. They would evacuate the population as planned, but instead of establishing defenses, they would rig the entire star system to explode in a carefully orchestrated sequence, not as a weapon against the Silence, but as a massive distraction while the real evacuation occurred in a completely different direction than any established protocol would suggest. The concordance military commanders were horrified by the proposal. It violated every principle of civilized warfare and seemed to serve no strategic purpose other than destroying valuable resources. But their conventional approaches had been failing for decades, and desperation was beginning to override their natural caution. Elena watched the communications flow back and forth between concordance worlds as they debated humanity's radical proposal. For the first time since the war began, they were considering strategies that operated completely outside their established framework of logical military thinking. The test of humanity's tactical theories came sooner than anyone expected. Elena received an urgent communication from the concordance while she was working late in the Deep Space Communication Center, and what she read made her heart race with both excitement and terror. The Silence had changed its approach and was now moving faster than predicted, targeting multiple star systems simultaneously instead of its usual methodical advance. Dr. Kevin Murphy had been brought in to analyze the mathematical patterns behind the Silence's movements, and his expertise in chaos theory was proving invaluable in understanding their enemy's behavior. The Silence isn't just technologically superior, he explained to Elena and the rest of the human advisory team during an emergency strategy session. It's strategically adaptive in ways that conventional military thinking cannot counter. Kevin displayed his analysis on the main screen, showing how the Silence had been learning from each encounter with concordance forces over the past several decades. Every time the concordance develops a new defensive strategy, the Silence analyzes their approach and develops countermeasures. But all of its learning data comes from civilizations that approach warfare using similar logical frameworks. Elena studied Kevin's mathematical models and began to understand the fundamental problem that had been defeating the concordance for so long. Their enemy was not just more advanced, it was more adaptable, constantly evolving its tactics based on predictable patterns of civilized military response. What if we could give the silence data that doesn't fit any logical pattern? Elena suggested. What if we could force it to analyze strategic choices that operate completely outside its understanding of rational military behavior? The opportunity to test this theory came when the silence approached the Kepler 442 system, just as the concordance had predicted. The system contained two heavily populated worlds with advanced civilizations that had been part of the Alliance for over 2,000 years. According to standard protocols, the concordance would establish a defensive perimeter while evacuating the civilian population to predetermined safe zones. Captain Roy Phillips, a former Marine officer who had been appointed to command humanity's strategic advisory role, worked with Elena to develop an alternative approach that violated every principle of conventional warfare. Instead of following logical evacuation procedures, they proposed deliberate chaos designed to confuse rather than defeat their enemy. We evacuate the population exactly as planned, Roy explained to the Concordance military commanders during a secure communication session. But instead of establishing defensive positions, we rig the entire star system to explode in a sequence that serves no strategic purpose other than creating massive confusion. The alien commanders were appalled by the proposal. Commander Zalth of the Andorian fleet transmitted his concerns directly to Elena. This plan destroys valuable resources for no military gain. It violates every principle of civilized warfare and appears to serve no logical purpose. Elena understood the alien commander's confusion, but she also understood something that thousands of years of logical military evolution had not prepared the concordance to consider. That's exactly the point, she replied. The silence has learned to counter every logical military response you could make, but it has never encountered strategies that deliberately make no logical sense. Amy Watson had been analyzing the tactical communications between concordance forces and had identified the core weakness in their approach to the conflict. You've been fighting the silence like chess masters playing against another chess master, she explained during the strategic planning session. Every move you make follows established principles of good military strategy. But what if your opponent has learned to anticipate every good move? The concordance agreed to test humanity's radical approach, though their reluctance was clear in every communication. They would evacuate the Kepler 442 system according to standard protocols, but instead of establishing logical defensive positions, they would implement what Kevin had dubbed strategic irrationality. Elena watched the operation unfold through intercepted communications from the Concordance fleet. The evacuation proceeded normally, with civilian populations being transported to safe zones using established procedures, but simultaneously, human advisors were directing the placement of explosive devices throughout the star system in patterns that served no apparent strategic purpose. The explosives themselves were primitive by concordant standards, chemical weapons that no advanced civilization would consider using in modern warfare, but their placement followed a deliberately chaotic pattern designed by Kevin's chaos theory algorithms to create maximum confusion while providing no tactical advantage to either. So when the silence arrived at Kepler 442, it encountered something unprecedented in its experience. Instead of organized defensive positions, it found a star system destroying itself in patterns that violated every principle of logical tactical thinking. The explosions were too small to threaten the silence directly, but too widespread and random to serve any apparent strategic purpose. Elena monitored the silence's response through data transmitted by concordance observation posts positioned outside the system. For the first time in decades of conflict, their enemy appeared to hesitate. The systematic advance that had characterized every previous encounter was replaced by what appeared to be analysis paralysis. It's trying to understand our strategy, Kevin observed as he studied the sensor data. The silence is designed to counter logical military responses, but we've given it data that doesn't fit any recognizable pattern. While the silence attempted to analyze the chaotic explosion pattern at Kepler 442, the concordance was implementing the second phase of humanity's plan. Instead of evacuating to the predetermined safe zones that logical military doctrine would suggest, the civilian populations were being secretly relocated to star systems that had been marked as unsuitable for evacuation according to standard protocols. Roy had identified these locations by deliberately choosing destinations that violated conventional wisdom about strategic retreat. Instead of moving to heavily defended systems, the evacuees were being relocated to areas that appeared tactically vulnerable, but were actually outside the Silence's predicted advancement routes. The strategy worked beyond anyone's wildest expectations. The Silence spent weeks analyzing the meaningless explosion patterns at Kepler 442, while the Concordance successfully evacuated 3 additional star systems using equally irrational strategies developed by the Human Advisory Team. Amy had developed what she called the Phillips Doctrine, a systematic approach to tactical unpredictability that introduced calculated irrationality into every military decision. Instead of trying to outthink the Silence, human advisors were teaching the Concordance to embrace strategic confusion as a weapon. Elena realized that they had discovered something that thousands of years of advanced civilization had missed. Sometimes the most effective strategy was to have no strategy at all, to make choices that operated completely outside established frameworks of logical thinking. The success at Kepler 442 marked the first time in decades that the Concordance had gained ground against the Silence. More importantly, it demonstrated that humanity's greatest contribution to the Galactic War was not their technology or firepower, but their willingness to embrace tactical approaches that advanced civilizations would never consider. For the first time since the conflict began, the Silence was reacting to Concordance moves instead of anticipating them. Elena watched the communications flowing between Concordance worlds and smiled. They had proven that sometimes the best solutions came from people who didn't know the rules well enough to follow them. 6 months had passed since the successful defense of Kepler 442, and Elena found herself aboard the Unity of Purpose, the massive flagship of the Concordance fleet. The ship stretched for kilometers in every direction, its corridors lined with technology that humanity could barely comprehend. Representatives from 12 different alien species worked alongside human advisors in what had become the most unlikely military partnership in galactic history. Elena walked through the ship's central command center, observing the controlled chaos of a war room that now operated according to principles that would have horrified military strategists just 1 year earlier. The orderly tactical displays and logical resource allocation charts had been replaced with deliberately confusing battle plans that followed no recognizable pattern. Captain Roy Phillips stood at the center of the command area, coordinating what the Concordance had begun calling Phillips Doctrine operations across multiple star systems simultaneously. The former Marine had adapted remarkably well to commanding strategic operations on a galactic scale, though he often admitted to Elena that he felt completely unprepared for the responsibility. "The Tau Ceti operation is ready to begin," Roy announced to the assembled command staff. "The Silence has surrounded the star system with a containment field and is preparing for systematic destruction, according to its established pattern." Elena studied the tactical display showing the Silence's fleet positioned around Tau Ceti in perfect formation. Their enemy had returned to its methodical approach after the confusion at Kepler 442. But human advisors had been using the intervening months to develop even more radical strategies. Dr. Nancy Foster, who now served as humanity's chief strategic coordinator, had been analyzing the Silence's behavioral patterns for weeks in preparation for this moment. "Our enemy has adapted to expect some level of irrationality from Concordance forces," she explained to the mixed group of human and alien commanders. "But it still operates under the assumption that our ultimate goal is tactical victory through some form of logical military action." The breakthrough in understanding their enemy had come from studying the Silence's response to previous human-designed strategies. While their enemy had learned to expect unpredictable tactics, it still assumed that those tactics were designed to achieve recognizable military objectives. The Silence could adapt to irrational methods, but it could not comprehend irrational goals. Elena had proposed the most radical strategy yet attempted in the Galactic War. Instead of fighting to defend Tau Ceti or evacuating its population to safety, they would deliberately surrender the entire star system to the Silence, while simultaneously achieving objectives that their enemy could not possibly anticipate. "We're going to surrender," Elena announced to the command center, causing immediate alarm among the alien officers who had not been briefed on the complete plan. Commander Vex of the Centaurian Defense Corps transmitted his concerns directly to Elena's workstation. Surrender violates every principle of military resistance. The population of Tau Ceti will be completely destroyed. Elena understood the alien commander's horror, but she also understood something that advanced military thinking had never considered. We're not actually surrendering, she explained. We're performing a fake surrender designed to draw the silence into close quarters where their technological superiority becomes irrelevant. Roy activated the detailed tactical display that showed the true scope of their plan. The Concordance fleet would broadcast surrender signals and withdraw from the system, according to established protocols that the Silence had observed dozens of times before. Their enemy would move in to process their victory using the same systematic approach it had developed over decades of conflict. But hidden throughout the Tau Ceti system were thousands of primitive explosive devices that no advanced civilization would consider using in modern warfare. Chemical bombs, nuclear weapons, and even simple kinetic projectiles had been placed in locations where the Silence would position its forces during the occupation phase. The explosives won't cause significant damage to their ships, Nancy explained to the assembled commanders, but they will force the Silence to confront something it has never encountered before, an enemy that deliberately chooses inferior weapons for reasons that serve no logical tactical purpose. Elena watched as the operation began with Concordance forces, broadcasting surrender messages to the Silence fleet. The alien commanders were clearly uncomfortable with the plan, but months of successful human strategies had convinced them to trust approaches that violated their natural instincts. The Silence responded exactly as predicted, moving its forces into the Tau Ceti system to begin the systematic processing that had destroyed hundreds of civilizations over the past several decades. Their enemies' ships took up positions throughout the star system, according to the same efficient pattern they had used countless times before. Elena monitored the operation from her position on the Unity of Purpose, watching as the Silence's fleet settled into the predetermined positions that human strategists had anticipated. The moment their enemy completed its deployment, Roy activated the hidden explosives that had been placed throughout the system. The explosions were spectacular, but strategically meaningless by advanced military standards. Chemical bombs and nuclear weapons that would have been devastating to human technology barely registered as inconveniences to the Silence's ships. But the psychological impact was unprecedented. For the first time in the Galactic War, the Silence found itself under attack by weapons that were simultaneously primitive and completely unexpected. Their enemy had surrendered and then attacked with inferior technology, for no apparent tactical reason. The behavior violated every pattern that the Silence had learned to anticipate from civilized warfare. Elena watched in amazement as sensor data showed the Silence's fleet beginning to withdraw from the Tau Ceti system. Their enemy was not retreating because of damage from the primitive explosives, but because it could not process the strategic logic behind humanity's approach. It's trying to recalculate, Kevin observed, as he analyzed the data streaming from observation posts throughout the system. The Silence's adaptive algorithms cannot find stable solutions when confronted with strategies that operate outside logical frameworks. The withdrawal from Tau Ceti marked the first time that the Silence had voluntarily abandoned a target system. More importantly, it demonstrated that their seemingly invincible enemy could be defeated not through superior technology or firepower, but through strategic approaches that transcended conventional military thinking. Elena stood in the observation deck of the Unity of Purpose and looked out at the stars that represented thousands of civilizations, depending on humanity's continued ability to confuse and confound their ancient enemy. The signal that had started everything was never meant for humans, but they had answered anyway. In responding to a call for help that was never intended for them, humanity had discovered that their greatest strength was not their technology or their courage, but their complete willingness to ignore the rules that govern civilized behavior. Sometimes the most important messages were the ones you weren't supposed to receive, and sometimes the best solutions came from people who approach problems from completely outside established frameworks. Elena smiled as she watched the stars and realized that the galaxy's most primitive civilization had become its most valuable, strategic asset simply by refusing to think like everyone else. The war against the Silence was far from over, but for the first time in decades, the forces of civilization had hope. and that hope had come from a species that had accidentally intercepted a signal they were never meant to hear, and had answered in ways that no one could have predicted.